Hey guys, Gregory here. Gregory Speaks. This is the second video response to the topic of supposed proof for God's existence, and this time talking about the ex nihilo from nothing comes nothing, and as a response to my brother. This will be the last one because I've already answered all these things and assumed that by referencing to the people watching what has refuted this or what has at least rebutted this, that they would go look it up, and apparently that's not the case. I have to go through in a little more detail, so I'll do this again, and I'm going to respond to everything that was said about my video, each in order here. So first of all, as we get going in this video, please keep in mind that when someone says out of nothing comes nothing, that this is an assumption. What I said in my video before, which is true, is that it is a logical contradiction if you assume that there is truth in that statement. So if you assume that it is actually physically impossible that and logically impossible that that something come from nothing, and you assume that based on all the evidences we see now that seem to point to that, then using that, using it in any other way would be a logical contradiction. It is a logical contradiction. However, there are objections, and I don't know if I misrepresented that or confused that in my video, but there are like something like 10 objections to the ex nihilo that it's by no means proven to be true, and it is an assumption. Formulating a logical argument based on that assumption will result in contradictions. That doesn't mean that it's true. There's a difference. Okay, so first of all, we'll go through everything that was said about my video, and this is, and I'm quoting the person that what they said in response to me, and then I will give a response. So first they said that I said this argument is logical, the ex nihilo, the from nothing comes nothing, that it was logical. I said no. Actually, I didn't say it was logical. I said it's a logical contradiction itself alone, but it's assumed to be a contradiction. No one knows if it's physically possible, scientifically possible. And here's the key point: no one can deduce this by deductive reasoning alone. So it's impossible at this point, anyway, to know whether that is a true statement or not. If you assume it is a true statement and use it in an argument, then it becomes a contradiction, or contradictions arise. What someone could do to make this argument stronger, if they're using the from nothing comes nothing in a cosmological argument, is that they could try to prove that there is an actual finite universe, and that they could try to argue that, because it can't be proven right now. But they could try to argue that the universe is finite and that there is a finite number of past events. Now, William Lane Craig does this. R.C. Sproul, in the book that was being read to me, is an advocate of this, although he doesn't argue for it very well. He has a lot of weak arguments for this. Or I think William Lane Craig has the best one, and it's also been dismantled and is full of holes and fallacies. There is no one that's alive today that has any sort of proof logically or scientifically that the universe is in fact finite, or that there is in fact a finite number of past events. Now, that whole argument, the cosmological argument, is based upon this premise that the universe is in fact finite and based upon a finite number of past events. In the video that I was responding to, I saw no evidence to support or prove that in any way. It was just assumed. And this is what happens often with Christians, particularly, and with everyone that's religious or apologetics that are arguing the existence of God, is they make assertions that are based on assumptions. It is assumed that the universe is finite. Now, to talk about what arguments are there out there that that try to prove the universe is finite, okay? Because first of all, we don't know for a fact, we don't know for certain that something cannot come from nothing. We don't know that. If we assume the universe is finite, then of course that something coming from nothing is absolute contradiction. But we don't know the universe is finite, and so the arguments for the universe being finite and the number of finite number of past events are by William Lane Craig. Talks about he uses Hilbert's Hotel, and I've already discussed this. He uses Hilbert's Hotel and things like that to set up illustrations to show that when using an actual infinity, absurdities arise. Um, so, hold on. I wonder if I should. Well, I'll refer you to, and Sean, if you're watching this, go to the Hilbert's Hotel thing. But basically, to sum it up, is Hilbert's Hotel illustrates that absurdities do arrive when you use infinities. Hilbert's Hotel was something put forward by a mathematician for mathematical theorems specifically, and in those mathematical theorems where absurdities arise, we are perfectly capable of using infinity to complete equations, and proving absurdities arising when using infinity in certain areas does not prove that anything about the impossibility of an actual infinite number of past events. That has not been proven. Okay, that is theorized, but it's not proven. And unlike the other alternative options, which I think are better explanations, it doesn't. There's no evidence to support that, and there is no argument that proves to us that there is an actual finite number of past events. Now, everything in the ex nihilo, the only reason why you would use from nothing comes nothing along with a cosmological argument is because you have to base that whole cosmological argument upon the assumption that the universe is finite back to a first cause, right? That's what this whole thing is about. The first cause. It's all an argument. You boil down the cosmological argument past all the ridiculous details, and it comes down to first cause. That's what it's about. That something can't come from nothing. That's the main premise. That's what was being argued in the video, and what I already responded to before this video was even made, and what I'm responding to now, which is that it's all based upon an assumption that cannot be proven logically or scientifically. There is no proof that there is an infinite number of past events, nor is there any proof that something can't come from nothing. Those are all assumptions. Here's a quote about something said to me. This person says, in your video, I think you agree with me because you're actually being intellectually honest. No, I conceded that ex nihilo can be a contradiction. This does not mean it is necessarily true, and since it is also fallacious in the sense that it is deduced, then we shouldn't put any trust in it either, because no one can deduce for any certainty anything which might prove that. And this goes along with Hume, and I referenced Hume, and apparently no one looked it up. But what I was referencing was when he talks about the properties of God, that you cannot use a priori reasoning to talk about what attributes God has. It's impossible to say God must be omniscient, God must be loving, God must be this, God must be that. Why? Because a priori reasoning cannot determine those things. It cannot reliably give you an answer to those things. Because anything that you can imagine to exist, any attribute that you can give to God, you can also not give to God. Anything that you can imagine existing, like a unicorn, you can also imagine not existing. And so a priori reasoning is not helpful. The only way you're going to determine if there is a God is if you can deduce it, in my opinion. And that means that God would either have to be part of the natural world, right? Or that you would have to have some proof that the supernatural exists, which means that it would be part of the natural. So this is a confusion of what science is and what it does, and this happens all the time. Science is a methodology that works within the natural world. Okay, it is not a metaphysics. And it deals with certain questions that are combined with metaphysics and philosophy and things like that, but it attempts to answer these questions based upon empirical evidences and theories. Now, theories, and I'm getting off on a tangent here, but stay with me because this all comes back to this argument. Theories are not the theory. This is a huge misunderstanding of science, and I see this represented in Sean's video response to me. Theories are not like people think about theories every day, where you say a theory is just something that is unsupported, or it's an idea to try to explain something, but it's not proven. A scientific theory is based upon prior scientific knowledge and mountains upon mountains upon mountains of testable, verifiable, empirical evidences. Now, the theory about something, like we'll take the theory of atoms for example. When the theory of atoms was developed, a person didn't just say, well, I think everything's there must be atoms in existence, and just throw it out there like that, and just by a priori reasoning, no prior natural world testable verifiable evidence, just I'm just going to think about it, and I think that it must be atoms, and so I call these things atoms. Although that may seem to be what happened in the theory of atoms, what actually happened was is physical things were broken down. By observing these natural things in the natural world being broken down to smaller pieces and smaller pieces and smaller pieces, and by observing the phenomena that occurs, which is that no matter how far you break it down, it continues to break down. Then a theory was developed that at some point there must be a final stage of breaking down to where, and we'll call that particle atoms. Now, is that theory proven to be true? We have proven that atoms exist, but also we've proven that even smaller particles exist, and so we don't know where that ends yet. But the point is, the methodology to come to these conclusions was all by being able to observe something, a phenomenon in the natural world, or if it's something that seems to be beyond our scope of testability, to compose theories based upon other prior observed methods of science, and everything since the development of the scientific method has proceeded in this fashion. It is not metaphysics. Okay, so so you can't sit there and say that God is out in a supernatural realm. And well, I'll get to that. I'll get to that in a second. So first of all, you haven't proven anything about an actual infinite amount of past events existing and therefore an infinite universe, because it's definitely possible that there is finite universe. I'm sorry, finite for both of those. It is definitely possible that there is an infinite universe, and that is out of the three models that we trust today, those two of them are infinite universe models, and only one is left that is a finite universe model. There's another quote here. This is from the person in the video. Just because Hume had a response doesn't mean it was a logical response. And then he goes into saying that that we can't rely on the clout of someone just because they're a scientist or just because they are a philosopher. I agree. I definitely agree. And it is definitely true that you can't just rely on someone's authority to talk about these things. But I think you misunderstand me. I'm not relying on Hume's authority or relying on anyone's authority. In the words of Thomas Paine, my mind is my own church. I have come to these conclusions with only my own reasoning. Now, of course, people research things and they find information, and that's what I've done, just like you've done, and you've ended up with R.C. Sproul. The difference here I'm saying is that R.C. Sproul and you stop. That's what religion teaches you to do. That's what faith teaches you to do. That's what these things teach you to do, is because, and let's not pretend that you're just arguing this like a logician and that you don't have some vested interest in it. That's another thing you said. I'm not talking about my religion. I'm not talking about the Bible. I'm not talking about my personal beliefs. I'm just talking about the existence of God. Well, why are you talking about the existence of God? You're trying to prove the existence of God because you're a Christian, because you're trying to prove that God exists so that you can warrant your belief in him. And isn't it interesting how people like to not talk about the talking snake, or the people that were walking the streets resurrected from the graves when Jesus died, or the people that were cured of blindness, or all of those other ridiculous supernatural claims that have no basis in evidence. And that's something that you conveniently leave out, which I'm glad that you did, but you have to ask yourself why. Doesn't it say something about this presupposed belief that you're trying to support by using R.C. Sproul, or by the method of how you're coming to these conclusions, or how you're gaining this information? Doesn't it say something that you find it necessary not to talk about those things? It's because if you did, everyone would instantly know how ridiculous those claims are, because they're completely unsupported. So you stick with the one unfalsifiable thing, God, that's unassailable, and then you try to construct arguments to prove his existence. Well, as I've shown, and as many have shown, those arguments don't hold up, and so you still have all of your work ahead of you. The atheist doesn't need to prove anything. The agnostic doesn't need to prove anything, and there is no faith required from my standpoint whatsoever. You are the person with the claims that there is absolutely a God. You are the person with the claims that you know what God that is and what he requires of you, and so you must muster the evidence. Having done that, I can say that you haven't proven anything. Now, let me get back to this argument again, the cosmological argument. Another quote: when Stephen Hawking says that the universe can spark itself, there's no need for a first cause. He's talking out his mouth. There is no proof. My response is no, it cannot be fully proven that this is the case. That's true. But also the converse is true. You cannot prove the universe must have a cause. Stephen Hawking can't prove that it doesn't need a cause. You can't prove that it must have one, because of the fact that ex nihilo is not proven. It's an assumption. A finite universe is not proven. It's an assumption, and so you cannot prove those things any more than Stephen Hawking. But what is important here, the difference between you and Stephen Hawking, is that he bases all his conclusions on an intimate knowledge of physics and explains that knowledge very well in his book about how particles, matter, and energy, quantum levels of mechanics, behave quite counterintuitively. If you haven't read the book, get it. I have it. I've read it several times. I think one of the things that stuck out most to me is buckyballs, where it talks about how they've set up the screen to catch these particles, and they've left a space, much like you would if you set up. The analogy is a soccer ball, kicking soccer balls through a wall where there's a space it can get through, and they say that they fire it at the space, but for some reason some of them end up on the wall and some of them end up behind a wall where that's you would think physically impossible for it to get there. And why is that? The only thing they can theorize is that it's because these buckyballs are moving through all points of time and space simultaneously until they stop. Now, and so that's how it explains the strange configuration that they end up being in, where if you did it with a soccer ball in our natural world in our plane of existence, it would never, ever, ever end up that way. But on quantum levels of existence, all kinds of things happen that are absolutely counterintuitive. One of those things that could happen is something coming from nothing. We don't know, but the point that Hawking is making is that based upon all the physics and everything that he's seen, he's not arguing that he absolutely knows something came from nothing. He's arguing that he knows that everything that he's seen proceeds without the assumption of God, easily without the presumption of God. And if all these other things and all these quantum mechanics of physics and everything that he's intimately aware of can proceed without using the assumption of God, then so can the beginning of all these things. Okay? And so now I'm not going to argue whether that's true or not, because it can't really be answered, but what you're doing is being a reductionist with Hawking, and I'm not sure you're fully aware of what he argues in that book, but I suggest you check it out. But again, it goes back to the fact that you can't prove that, or even come up with an argument that even suggests that the assumptions you are making are absolutely true. And I'm not going to go into this because I'm already spending too much time on this, but if you don't believe me, go look up some 10 rebuttals, rejections of ex nihilo. There's tons, many of them. Some of them I don't necessarily agree with because I think they're too biblically based, but many of them are logically sound and good questions to ask that if anything show that this is not set in stone, and it does not, in the words of your first video, end the discussion in any way. Then you say that these things, with these things, there will never be any proof. It's not possible to prove these things. You're talking about the physics and the something from nothing in the beginning of the universe. If it is within the natural, okay. So here's my response to that. Given enough time, if these things are within the natural world and they fit within the methodology of science, they can and will be proven given enough time. And that's the point, isn't it? You place God in the supernatural realm and you say it's absolutely, that's why God is able to be this uncaused causer, because he's in the natural realm, along with your special pleading for God. But as you said, where is the quote from you where you said, what if the supernatural is part of the natural world, right? Okay, so what if it is? Then the supernatural will eventually be put to rest. We'll know exactly what it is, and we'll discover again what we already have enough evidence to support, what we think, which is there is nothing but the natural world. And if we discovered the supernatural world, we would just say it's the natural world. Science is a methodology that deals with the natural world, and that's all we have evidence to conclude exists. And so that's what we must base our benchmark for judging these things on. Not in some whatever you can create out of a priori reasoning, just whatever you can imagine, because anything you can imagine, you can also or well, not unimagine, that's not a word, but you can also imagine not to exist. Another quote, you said, "We are discussing a concept of the origin of the universe that requires some kind of supernatural, something that brought it into existence." No, we have no evidence that requires anything outside of the natural realm to bring it into existence, only that there must be a first cause based upon the assumption that the universe is finite. That's extremely important for you to understand, that it is not proven, and there is no argument that makes it so, that the universe must be finite. There's plenty of evidence, physics evidence, that suggests that the universe might be, we don't know for sure, but might be infinite. Now, I don't see why you have a problem with that, and I've said this in every video. I don't see why anybody has a problem with that when you want to turn around and make God infinite. Okay, and this is the main problem with this argument that I've said over and over and over and over, to which you have not responded, to which no one has responded. And I'll say it again. You are setting up an argument where you explain existence by causes. You say everything exists because it had a prior cause. And then you base that, and that's based upon the assumption that there is a finite number of causes. And then you say that ultimate cause, that first cause, must be something uncaused, right? And then you say, but that cause must be God. Now, first of all, it's special pleading, because you say all existence must be explained by a cause, except God, right? And the reason you don't have to explain that why is because you've given it that attributes. That's the only reason why. If you go with that premise, every existence is explained by a cause, then God must be explained. God must have a cause. But you say, oh, but not God, because God is the first cause, and because he's the first cause, he does not require another cause based upon an infinite universe. Okay, those are all assumptions. Those are all assumptions. Assumptions that the universe is finite, assumption that something can't come from nothing, assumption that there is an infinite number of past events, and then special pleading for God where he gets to be uncaused and you don't have to explain his existence, where every other aspect of existence after God you explain by causation, and you don't by God. Special pleading on that part, and tons of assumption going on. I've explained this 100 times, and I'm not sure how I can say that any other way. And you say that your argument, that's the argument, and that's just logical. Well, see the things that I've said over and over. It's not logical. It can be considered. There are elements of logic in it, but it's definitely not an end-all to the discussion. Then you say Peter Atkins, the natural world is it, or where Peter Atkins says the natural world is it. There is no supernatural, and then you say that's a biased way of looking at this. No, it's not. Peter Atkins and others say this because they base their decisions off of all the available evidences that we have so far, like any scientific mind would. All the evidences thus far show that there is no evidence for a supernatural realm of existence. The supernatural realm is nothing but a concept with nothing to support it. And if we were to be able to test it and verify it, if we were able to verify its existence, it would be part of the natural world, and so therefore it does not exist until we can discover it, and then it does not exist. It's a contradiction. So supernatural is a moot point. Okay, theory to you equals something unproven, an idea about something that could be. Theory to scientists is a formation of an explanation that's dependent on empirical evidences based in the natural world. And so you can't just jump into the realm of supernatural and say scientists are using theories just like our theory about the supernatural is theory. Those two types of theories and use of the word are absolutely, completely light years apart, and you are confusing them. Then you say, for a quote-unquote scientist to have his head buried in the sand and to not think about any other options but what I can see with my own eyes in the natural world as we know it, he's already ignorant and arrogant. Again, you astound me with your misunderstanding of science. Science deals with the natural realm only, since it is based upon evidence and is a study of that world. It is not metaphysics. It proceeds in the way it does because it's the only way it can proceed. It's a methodology to determine how things take place and why in the world around us. When the supernatural realm presents any evidence that exists, it becomes the natural. So I already answered that. And you say because of that, because they're not considering the supernatural, that their thinking on this is limited. And I said, exactly. My response is exactly. Their thinking it has been limited. They've created limitations to their thinking, which is why it is superior. They limit subjectivity, revelation, a priori reasoning, and they rely on the empirical evidences, theories that are developed over previous knowledge and discoveries and verifiable occurrences in the world. And those things have consistently been proven to be accurate, whereas subjective experience and a priori reasoning have been consistently proven to be unreliable and erroneous. So, is there limitations to what science can explain? Probably not, because everything seems to be in the natural world, which means everything would be within the realm of science to explain, given enough time. If there are any limitations to what it explains, that's to its credit, because we can imagine anything, and it doesn't mean that it's real. We have no basis of coming up with whether or not that's true. So, just like you can use your cosmological argument to argue that it proves the existence of God, and then jump to the conclusion that it must be a personal God, which you said it's got to be an intelligent person or someone who designed it with intention, which is, I don't know how you got to that conclusion, but if just like you can say that, I can say a purple unicorn created the universe, use the cosmological argument to prove it, make my God unfalsifiable, just like you've made God unfalsifiable, which, by the way, Karl Popper has pointed out many, many times is a weakness of an argument, not a strength. And then, voila, the purple unicorn created the universe, and you can't prove me wrong. And so that's not an argument. That doesn't get us anywhere, okay? And you say, I see you do that. I see you limiting yourself. And no matter what I say, you say Christians don't use logic. And that's because they don't. I find it convenient that you leave out the beliefs, like I said earlier, that if you talk about what is actually your belief system, not just your argument about this God, why are you arguing for this God, you find instantly that it's all fairy tale, that it's substantiated by nothing. And that's why you leave it out and you don't mention it in these arguments, and why people never bring those things to a debate. They only bring the logical arguments to a debate, which also contain fallacies and holes in them. And so do they use logic when they say that there was a talking snake in the Garden of Eden? Do they use logic when they make these religious claims? Absolutely not. And are you using logic when you say, for a fact, it's just a fact, and that's the logic, and it ends the discussion that something can't come from nothing? Are you really using logic there? At least 10 different rebuttals disagree with you. So I would say, no. I would say you're not looking or using logic in the way that I would use logic anyway, to just discover whatever you discover and find whatever answer you find. You are using it, and all the Christian apologetics, to support a presupposition that God did it. You're using it to gather ammunition for your doctrinal beliefs. And if we examine those doctrinal beliefs, we find out that they have no ground in reality any more than my purple unicorn. And the problem with faith, by the way, this is a little off topic, but the problem with faith is that once you accept that, once you say God exists and I know it, because I know it, which is all you're doing. You're just making assertions. You haven't proved anything logically. Once you do that, then and you believe that it is the, say, for example, just using the example, the Judeo-Christian God, then you're mandated to believe all the other garbage about resurrection and about the people that came out of the graves and the curing of the blind and all these miracles that supposedly existed, the raising on the third day, all that stuff. You have to believe it, because if you believe that God wrote your Bible and it's an inspired word of God, then why would you question these other things? And that's why I have a problem with religion. So you say you don't think my intent is to listen to what I'm saying. You think my intent is to defend my position. But the funny thing is it's exactly the opposite. You and all the religious people have all the work ahead of you. You are the ones that have to defend, because you are making the outlandish claims. And so the burden of proof is on you. I don't have to prove my disbelief any more than I need to prove a disbelief in the tooth fairy. It's self-evident. For you to change that belief system, you must bring claims, which you have, and then you must convince me, not the other way around. I'm simply not convinced, and all I'm doing is pointing out that that you haven't provided anything that proves the cosmological argument. And then you say, this is something, or the from nothing comes nothing, that I agree with because it can't be debated logically. Well, I just debated it. I debated it before you put your video up. It's been debated 100 times. Um, and it's been debated for 100 years, for hundreds of years, and there's, like I said, at least 10 objections to that. One of them is Hume. It's a great one, and you say everything either had a beginning or did not everything. Okay, so anyway, here's the problem, and I know this isn't very organized because I'm sort of ranting, but here's the problem with what you're doing. You set up an argument, and then you give special pleading to part of the argument. You make it convenient to fit the definition of God based on assumptions. And when you say stuff like everything either had a beginning or it did not everything, then that means everything. That means God either had a beginning or he did not. Okay, and so the same thing can be said about how you explain existence. If you say all existence must be explained by causation, by a finite number of causes going back, then so God must be explained by causation. So your argument falls apart. Now the way that it works is because you give special attributes to God, which if you take God out and you replace it with the purple unicorn, or you replace it with three gods instead of one. Replace it with something other than God, a mechanical just property of the universe, or property of matter and energy. Like many people think, yeah, well, I'll get into that in a minute. But anyway, so replace it, to take out God, your image of one personal God that must have designed it with purpose and intent. Replace it with a purple unicorn with purpose and intent. Replace it with 3 gods or 5 gods or 10 gods. You have no idea what supposedly what the attributes of these things are, because like David Hume said, you can't come up with those with only your a priori reasoning. It's impossible, because you can also not imagine anything you imagine. And so just like you imagine a God there and you say, well, God must be that first cause that the cosmological argument supposedly proves based upon an assumption of a finite number of events, and you say God is that, so it's God, and you are defining what that first cause is and giving it its attributes that it is uncaused. Okay, but that's special pleading, because everything else in that argument, everything else that you're explaining, all other existence that you're explaining is explained by causation. And so you must also apply that to God and say, well, then who made God? Who created God? Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is David Hume's argument that I already said, which is that there's no way you could possibly know the attributes of God anyway. So it's a moot point. You say nothing can come out of nothing, nothing comes out of nothing, and you restate that. You're just restating that same thing over and over and over. And I've said time and time again that although that it can be a logical contradiction in the way that you set it up, that is not necessarily proven. And then you say we've refuted the idea that, and then you say, and I was a little confused about this because you actually said we've refuted the idea that everything had a beginning, that everything is finite, which means you would have agreed with an infinite. But I think what you meant to say is you refuted the idea of an infinite, and that everything has a beginning, that everything is finite, and that before that first cause in the chain of causes, there was nothing. And you said other than that, anything other than that is illogical and an absurdity, and we throw it away. That's science, that's logic. And so I must ask, whenever did you refute, without a shadow of a doubt, an infinite universe, an infinite number of past events? What if the universe has no beginning? Now, this is funny because when you talk about this and you say it's absolutely absurd, it shows that you don't understand the science behind this, or that you just haven't researched it. But when somebody talks about this goes back to why I mentioned theories and why your understanding of the word theory is different than a scientific theory. Your understanding of the word nothing is different than a scientific nothing. Now, you clearly said, which I agree with, we're not talking about space where there's stuff flying around and whatever. We're talking about absolutely nothing, nothing in existence. That's the logical definition of what nothing that you're using in these arguments. And but that is not the definition of nothing that scientists like Stephen Hawking are talking about. When virtual particles pop into existence from nothing, from a vacuum, no one says there's absolutely nothing there in the logical sense. Of course, there must be something there for these things to pop into existence. But if you look at a vacuum, there's nothing that we can measure, that we know, that we can see, that we can test, that we can definitely verify and say this is what's there that caused this virtual particle. It seems that they pop out of nothing, but of course we know that a vacuum it has something, and so the assumption is that the universe always had something, that matter and energy are eternal, and that there is a possible actual infinite number of possibly even past events, and also there is an actual infinite universe that is a possibility. We haven't proven that yet, but unlike religion, who says we know everything right now, we're working on that based upon the methodology of science, which I talked about earlier. Okay, so what if the universe had no beginning? Would you have a problem with that? And that goes back to your special pleading. Why can God have no beginning, but the universe can't? You have not answered any of these things. You did not refute an infinite universe, an actual infinite in existence, or an infinite number of past events. So you think it's absurd to consider those things, but you haven't offered any evidence why we shouldn't. Um, you haven't proven God in any way, because even if you did prove a first cause, which you did not, and even if you did prove that for a fact something cannot physically come out of nothing, which you did not, it does not prove that the first cause, assuming a finite number of past events, is God. The first cause could be something completely unintelligent, completely without purpose, completely a result of the properties of the eternal properties of the universe. Then you say you can't say something that is uncaused, in other words, the universe, and insist that it first has a cause. So my question to you is, why would any idiot do that? And that's where it goes back to you misunderstanding what scientists are talking about when they say something came from nothing. The assumption is that there has always been something, that matter and that energy and matter are eternal. And if I don't know why you don't know that, because that idea has been around for a long, long, long time, and it's just now coming to the forefront where we're discovering how the universe seems to reflect that it operates. It truly does operate under that. Then you say, I'm not talking about proof, religion, whatever. We need to stick about whether God exists or not. And my response to that is, if you're going to talk about any of this, you need to have proof. You need to have something to bring to the table, because you are talking about religion. You are trying to defend your faith. You're trying to muster ammo to reinforce that presupposition that it's correct. And so if you weren't, why are you bothering rebuttaling me? Why are you bothering bringing an argument in any way? Of course, you're trying to argue that God exists based upon your doctrines. Bottom line, you say, core logic, there must be an eternal self-existent something for anything to exist. Again, this is an assumption. It cannot be proven, and even if it is true, it does not prove